Hello, everyone. It is now 10 o'clock and we are getting ready to get started. We have 34 people participating right now, and I see that number is going up very quickly. So I'm going to give it just one more minute. Wow. See, we're already up to almost 60. So let's give it 1 second for everyone to get online and be ready to go. Few more seconds. I will start with a quick introduction. My name is Dawn Berlin with the Supporting Inclusive Practices Project. We are thrilled to have you here for our first annual Mission Possible conference. And oh my goodness, we're up at 90 participants in this session. Fabulous. So welcome to our first breakout session for this conference, considering the needs of students with autism when universally designing for successful inclusive education opportunities. This webinar is being recorded and it will be archived on our conference agenda. So you'll be able to access it afterwards for 1 month. Closed caption is available by clicking the button, the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and the interpretation icon is in the same area, and there you can get access to this presentation in Spanish. We will ensure that the ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and the presenters. Please feel free to interact using the chat or the Q&A during this session. And with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Good morning, everyone. We are thrilled that you selected our presentation to attend. We are highly passionate and dedicated to improving outcomes for individuals on the autism spectrum. I'm Ann England. I'm the project coordinator of the SELPA Content Lead Autism, which is part of your statewide system of support through the California Department of Education, and the co-coordinator of CAPTAIN. And my co-presenter today is also my partner in all things with the project manager of SED at UC Davis Mind Institute. She's the executive coordinator of the SELPA Content Lead Autism, and my partner as co-coordinator of CAPTAIN, the California Autism Professional Training and Information Network. We have 133,199 students in our California schools. These are the 2021 numbers. Individuals with autism is the third largest disability eligibility group. Almost 17% of students with disabilities in our schools. And about 23,388 are also English language learners. These are the latest numbers we have. I think there was something called COVID that happened, and so we didn't quite get numbers about what was going on in our classrooms. But even so, when you look at 2018-19, you can see that red arrow. Only 40% of our individuals with autism were inside the regular class, less than 40% of the day. And so today, Patty and I want to share with you some universal design for learning guidelines that will support successful inclusion in our classrooms. Just a teeny bit about CAPTAIN. We're a multi-agency network developed to support the understanding and use of evidence-based practices for individuals with autism in California. And we are a multi-agency group. And so you can see all of our partners that really, as they say, it takes a village to support our individuals with autism. And these are our really strong partners that support our work. We have divided the state of California into 17 regions. You know what they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And we often talk with other states like Rhode Island or Ohio, and we go, well, welcome to California with 900 miles of coastline and the second largest school district in the United States, known as Los Angeles. So if you want to find your CAPTAIN cadre that are in California and available to you for consultation and to provide trainings and support, you go to the CAPTAIN website, go to the right side and look under quick links and click on CAPTAIN Cadre, and you can find those individuals who are as passionate as Patty and I at this work. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, a special education content lead for autism, and we're in partnership with Marin County SELPA. So we finally got funded. We've been doing this work since around 2008, and we finally got funded to give you all of these amazing resources. These are our tiers of support. So if you look at the universal support, you'll see our Captain website. Please go there. Everything's free. Recorded presentations, publications, infographics, trainings that are already made on these evidence-based practices, a whole page dedicated to family resources. So lots of links to only research-based, evidence-based practices for individuals with autism. When you look at that targeted support, that's where, our 419 Captain Cadre in California who represent family support and schools and regional centers, where I told you how to get a hold of them, they can provide information and training. And then our tier 3 support, which we are using a lot of the grant monies that we received, is to provide really highly specialized support to use the science of implementation to develop some demonstration sites with high quality programs for individuals with autism, and to also fund someone called a regional implementation lead who oversees the activities in your region. So these are our tiers of support. Now, you've probably, if you've been counting, heard me say evidence-based practice a whole lot of times. So why are we so focused on these? Well, on March 22nd, I Googled autism treatment and we got 368 million hits. Well, you guys know there's a myriad of treatments out there for autism. They're more diverse than for any other known disability. The treatment claims range from amelioration to recovery. And at this point, we really don't know what causes autism and we don't have a cure, but we do have evidence-based practices that will improve outcomes for individuals if they're implemented with, fidelity, meaning the way the research said they'd be most efficacious or helpful. And then many of the interventions, as you all know, have no scientific evidence and have been recommended for individuals with autism. And so that's what we're about, to really give you information of research-based evidences. And why do we want you to know about all of these? Well, it really does help us all know which treatments have evidence of effectiveness and which ones don't. It helps us to make informed decisions, right? If we have the best information about what's going to be helpful, we're not going to waste the time of our individuals with autism or our families or our educators, because we do know what will be most efficacious to improve outcomes. And then it also provides us the opportunity to really support our autistic individuals in reaching their full potential. And isn't that what this is all about? We always have to kind of go there about why do we use evidence-based practices? Well, as you all know, there's many state and federal laws and mandates and education codes that really require us to do that. So you all are probably familiar with IDEA and the Every Student Succeeds Act and the California Ed Code, and even insurance companies are requiring evidence-based practices. But what's the most important reason to use evidence-based practices is they work. I'm going to let Patty tell you all about these evidence-based practices that I've been talking about.
So obviously, of the over 3 million hits that Anne got when she went on Google, not all of those have evidence or research supporting them. The good news for us is that there are 28 evidence-based practices that have been found to help individuals with autism in meeting their IEP goals and objectives and improving their outcomes. They've been synthesized for us through the National Clearinghouse on Autism Evidence and Practice. And their manuals available through a quick link on our website if you're interested in looking at that and learning more. Next slide. NCAEP actually identified focused intervention practices, which are those that have evidence of efficacy for promoting positive outcomes for learners with autism. So they're not comprehensive treatments. These are actually practices that IEP teams can implement in classrooms very easily. Next slide. And as I said, there are 28 of these evidence-based practices, ranging from more structured behavioral types of interventions to things like parent-implemented interventions and peer-based instruction and interventions. Next slide. The inside of the manual, the NCAEP manual, you can find information about each of these practices, the definition, the age range, the different areas or domains the practice has been found to be effective for, as well as references that link you to the specific research articles that were published on the practices. There are also, through some of our community partners, autism-focused intervention resource and modules that are available on all of these 28 practices. And we're pointing this out to you because obviously in 1 hour's time, we're not going to be able to give you enough information to take a practice and put it into play in a classroom, but you can go to these free online learning modules, create an account, and access really high quality learning modules and additional resources on any of these 28 evidence-based practices. Next slide. The AFIRM modules also include really important documents that you can print out and use, including parent guides. There are videos demonstrating the application of all 28 of these evidence-based practices in real classrooms. And then there are implementation checklists that kind of walk you through step-by-step how to use each of these 28 practices. Keep going. And this is an example of one of those implementation checklists, which are wonderful because it really gives you sort of a step-by-step guide for how to use a practice effectively. And I think an important thing about these practices is they have to be implemented the way they were intended if you're expecting to get the outcomes that the research promises in terms of good results. Next slide. There are also online learning modules on the AFIRM website specifically for paraeducators, some kind of top used and most effective evidence-based practices that paraeducators can use with students to help them be successful. And these modules were developed specifically with them in mind. So lots of application and classroom examples of how to use these practices. Next slide. But most importantly, you guys are here because you want to know how these evidence-based practices can be infused within your programs to support individuals with autism and other significant support needs in inclusive settings. So without further ado, we're going to get on with that. And the bottom line issue is that we know that Universal Design for Learning, UDL, is really the foundation of supporting the diversity of needs that we have in our California public schools, including for those individuals that are affected by autism. Captain has worked really hard to make sure people know that these 28 evidence-based practices are just really good teaching practices and are essentially core components of good instruction when universally designing. Next slide. So thinking about the principle or the foundational element of engagement, which is a core component of Universal Design for Learning. There are some key differences for individuals with autism that have to be accounted for. The first one is individuals with autism often have sensory issues that can create different levels of distractibility that will need to be accounted for when designing the classroom environment as well as the instruction. The second consideration is their need for predictable and structured routines, as well as some differences in terms of their motivation. Socially based motivation may not be as salient to an individual with autism. They may not cue into it as much, or it may not be as meaningful. And then, of course, strong interests and passions are another consideration. The strong interests and passions can really be used as an advantageous strategy when universally designing, because we know that that taps straight into that center in the brain that we talk about in terms of brain-based learning that will help to engage our students and really keep them interacting and encouraged and motivated within the curriculum. Next slide. So universally designing instruction with autism in mind, some of the practices and strategies to consider, and these come from the evidence-based practices. The first one is to use visual supports and schedules and be consistent with your routines and expectations. Don't make assumptions that the individual necessarily understands or has generalized from one lesson to the next or one context to the next. Make sure that you're being really consistent and utilizing those visual means of representation to help them understand what's expected. Use their interests and passions. Don't fight against them. Embed them in whatever way that you can to be able to get that engagement. Try to account for sensory differences. Recognize them, ask the student about them, and then make sure that you're accounting for them through providing lots of different options. And I'll give you some examples of that in just a minute. You may need to allow for more movement and or flexibility in seating. And you may need to use different types of things to motivate or reinforce your students with autism, such as token reinforcement systems or first then kinds of visual supports to help them understand the expectations. Next slide. So we have for you here just a couple of examples. The worksheet on the left just shows how learner preferences are embedded in a math lesson. On the right, you'll see an example of a token reinforcement system where the student identifies what they're earning or working towards, and then sees visually as they're getting closer to completing an expectation or a lesson to gain access to that reward or that next activity. And then on the bottom right, one of the ways that you can account for some of the sensory differences is by providing lots of opportunities for choice. And the bottom right represents a common issue that I see when working with students in classrooms, and that's the preference for writing. Lots of students with autism have tactile differences that make them actually not have a preference for pencil lead. They feel it almost scratching on the paper or vibrating their hands. So something as simple as providing them with options and a choice for the writing utensil or instrument that they use can really help promote engagement and help them demonstrate what they're able to do. Next slide. These are just a few examples of some things that can be done within an inclusive circumstance or situation to account for sensory and attentional supports. On the left, you see pictured flexible seating. There are ball seats and there are wiggle cushions and there are stations where students may be allowed to stand rather than sitting. Also a really effective strategy for lots of students who may have a greater need for movement. In the center is just a shield to be able to promote some focused attention if a child is really visually distracted. And then on the bottom, one of my favorite, and trust me, my own children had these in place in their classrooms because they had a constant need for movement. Those TheraBands around the base of the chair can provide an in-class, non-intrusive opportunity to get that extra movement or that extra stimulation that a lot of students need to be able to stay focused and engaged. Next slide.
So we're going to look at the guideline UDL representation. And so some of the difference to account for in our individuals on the autism spectrum is that most are visual learners. Many are challenged by long verbal instructions. And I think you guys are all going, aren't we all? Strong rote memory and episodic memory, difficulty in seeing how parts link together. So they call that weak central coherence, meaning that they see the parts more than the whole thing, right? They see the trees except for the forest. And it'll make more sense to them typically if it's tied to a personal experience. So what do we do with this information? Well, we're going to make it visual. We're going to ground activities in previous, as Patty said, high interest motivating experiences, to use manipulatives, to augment verbal instructions with concrete visual cues, and to use video modeling. I hope you can see the pattern that we're showing you as universal design for learning. And we're going to show you some examples that, what's good for individuals with autism is often good for many of our students in our programs. So we're going to show you some real life examples from a school in Alameda Unified School District that actually has full inclusion for their students with disabilities. They needed some special support for their students with autism. And so as we move forward, we can see Miss Hernandez, who has her kindergarten class. We said, well, you know, the 2 students with autism would benefit from a visual schedule. And she goes, I know, but so would a lot of my other kids. And so she took it upon herself, and we supported her in making these visual supports to create the daily agenda right there on the board. And she didn't have that before, but now all the students actually refer to that. Looking at pro-social behavior, looking at rule cards, you know, all teachers tend to, shh, let's be quiet, listen. And so there's a lot of verbal prompting. And so we said, you know, what we really want to do is kind of fade that verbal prompt. It's actually one of the hardest prompts to fade, but we can use visual supports for our students with autism. Well, next thing you know, not only is Miss Hernandez using it with our students with autism, but all of her kindergartners, and then all the other teachers go, how are you getting your class to do that? So as they say, if you build it, they will come. And so now they have these necklaces and these visual rule cards about, you know, quiet hands, quiet voices. And this school is a platinum PBIS school. And so they had a lot of these things in place. They just needed to be universally designed for our students with autism. These are visual supports that help students get ready to learn. We kind of call these organizers and self-management tools. You know, how do we sit down at a desk and get ready to work? And again, as we said, our students with autism require more visual supports. And I just can't say this enough. The teacher said, well, that kid and really all my kids could benefit. That's what I'm here to teach them in kindergarten and first grade. Looking at this one up close, we can see this self-management checklist. This was kind of taking advantage of that PBIS that was already in place. They were in written form. And so we just simply gave a little box to do a check, to have a visual cue and paired with the words. So not only is it a way to self-manage, but it's also a way to kind of teach reading comprehension, right? So everything is everything. And it was very, very helpful. And as I said, she used it with all of her students. So this was a fun day where she was doing her morning circle with her little kindergartners, and our student he likes to talk and shout out answers, and he's trying to learn when he can talk and when to raise his hand. And so we were using that visual support with our student, and then she goes, I could use that with the rest of this class. So I said, quick, Joan, go get that made. So she ran to her office, printed this out, laminated it even. we're talking like in 5 minutes, because they have all the tools and strategies ready, handed it to the teacher, and now she uses it and it's magic. This is her visual support. So then she started thinking, what are all the things? So she has a hygiene station in her classroom. They're little, they're kindergarten, they're learning how to, in a very hygienic way, blow their nose and wash their hands and clean their hands. And so again, this was a mini task schedule and all the students benefited. So it was helpful to all the students, not just our students with autism. Miss Westland has a 5th grade classroom. And so she, we said our student has difficulty entering the classroom and knowing what he's supposed to do. So we made him a mini task schedule. And she goes, well, all my kids can learn, can hear the story. So you provide these strategies, and the teachers are amazing because they go, all my kids could use it. So we came back the next day. She created this flip chart by the front door, and now all our students get visual reminders on how to enter the classroom and get ready to learn. And again, this is another one where Miss Hernandez is walking down the hallway. Her classroom, her kindergarten classroom, got an award. It's a K-5 for being the quietest class that can transition, to wherever they're going, recess or the media room. And so she's using, you can hardly see it, but she's raising this up while they're walking down the hallway. Principal Harris dismisses students. So now we've got all the principals and the teachers using these. So she holds up and says, Miss Westland's class can leave for their lunch now. During fire drills, they now have in all of their emergency bags that they take out and they hold it up. They have the quietest fire drill, let me tell you. And this is leadership, so important. Principal Harris has her schedule on her door. And, you know, hoot, hoot, hooray, they're the owls. And so she gives hoot, hoot, hooray awards for individuals who use visual supports with all the students to support their inclusive educations that is school-wide for their school. And again, paraeducators using it in the hallway. So at this school, you don't hear a lot of shh, be quiet, we're moving, listen. It's everybody has these visual supports. So Patty, I'm going to let you move forward with action and expression.
Thanks, Anne. And I just want to point out some of the comments that are going on over in the chat. You know, the beauty of using visual supports, they might be necessary for a student with autism based on their unique characteristics, but they're helpful for all students. You know, sometimes students who maybe aren't impacted by anything just miss the direction, they miss the instruction, but to have that alternative visual to be able to go back to and rely on can be helpful for lots of different learners. So, you know, using visual supports and having that just be a part of the way that you design your instruction is going to be really successful and helpful for all students, not just students on the spectrum. All right, so when we think about action and expression, some of the differences to account for students with autism, written output may be very difficult. And there are multiple reasons for this. Some of it may be due to motor coordination and motor planning, which we know impacts lots of learners, not just students with autism, but definitely lots of our students with autism. The other aspect that may make written expression and written output challenging is executive functioning. I think writing is like the ultimate pinnacle of executive functioning because you have to not only organize your thoughts and remember all the rules and the rules of spelling and the rules of punctuation and grammar, but you have to do that while also keeping your thoughts and ideas organized in some way, shape, or form. So many of our students with autism really struggle with writing as a form of expressing or showing what they know for these reasons, executive functioning and motor. The second thing that we need to really design for and account for is difficulty with perspective taking. It is often very late to emerge in a student with autism and an individual with autism. Sometimes it can be significantly delayed. That ability to understand other people's thoughts and feelings, that ability to take other people's perspectives. And this shows up in a lot of different places in the curriculum. Not only in the curriculum, but also in social scenarios. Things like answering reading comprehension questions that ask things like, what was the person's motivation? Or what was the person thinking? How did they think their behavior or their actions would impact so-and-so or thus and such? That requires a really high level of perspective taking that can be a significant challenge for our students with autism. It can also impact social interactions. And so social skills are something that we have to account for and design for because these can be challenging in terms of being able to work within a group or participate within group type work or assignments. Next slide, Anne. So when applying the principles of universal design, some practices and strategies to consider. The first one would be to allow students different ways of being able to express or show what they know. Maybe they do it better verbally. Maybe they would do it better by drawing or doing some sort of PowerPoint presentation where it could be segmented and structured to support not only the writing aspect of it, the motor aspect of it, but with the organizational aspect of it. Sometimes segmenting information and being able to move those slides around can really support that executive functioning component that can be a challenge for our students. Use peer-mediated instruction and intervention. It's one of our 28 evidence-based practices, but this is huge to be able to not just put a student who has social challenges into a group, but really teach their peers what it means to be supportive of them. And teach the peers how to provide the additional prompts that a student may need to be successful. This is one of our favorite evidence-based practices and most successful evidence-based practices to support inclusion and can be really easily integrated when thinking about designing in inclusive settings. And then, of course, technology. I call it the great equalizer. And it's a really important 21st century skill. And technology in so many ways can help to support individuals who have these learning differences. But, you know, for a lot of kids, it's more engaging. They have a preference for it. And it really is teaching them, you know, how to be workers of tomorrow, because we all need to know how to use and feel comfortable with technology. So the more that can be integrated within the design of your instruction. Technology aided instruction is also one of the 28 evidence-based practices for students with autism. Next slide, Anne. So I have just a few examples of providing some different means of action and expression. This is an example right here of how a spelling test was designed to support a student with autism who had difficulty with that flexibility of thinking. So when they got to the homophones unit, he had a real challenge, because how could two words have two different meanings, or how could a word have two different meanings, and how could a word be spelled two different ways? So the homophone graphic organizer here, the Venn diagram, was the way that he was able to demonstrate and show what he knew and really learn this particular concept of language, and also demonstrate that he understood the definitions and the differences in spelling. Next slide. Same student, fast forward to sophomore year in high school. And you can see this was actually a quiz within his social studies about rapid urbanization. And for this student, you can see he has the ability to express himself in writing when it's a short sentence. That effort and energy to be able to hold the pencil, rip the pencil, make the words, keep them organized is a lot for him. But for short sentence answers, the first two, he could express in typical sentence writing. At the bottom, though, the expectation was more of a paragraph. And so he utilized a strategy of graphic organizers to be able to demonstrate what he knows. And I think if you look really closely at this, it's pretty clear that this student, even though not able to express the answer in a 5-sentence paragraph with perfect punctuation and spelling and sentence structure, gets it and understands the impacts and problems of rapid urbanization and what was being done as an attempt to fix them. Just a beautiful example of that flexibility with being able to allow students to demonstrate what they know in more flexible and meaningful ways for them. Next slide, Anne. All right. So we couldn't do a presentation on inclusion and supporting students with autism without talking about what is often the elephant in the room. And the reason why a lot of students with autism are excluded from opportunities to be in the least restrictive environment, and that's their behavior. So we wanted to give you guys some things to think about when it comes to challenging behavior or interfering behavior in the inclusive setting. So the most important thing, and this is really essential to having success with these students in inclusive environments, is you have to really start with your own thinking when it comes to behavior. Really, we're asking you to make a paradigm shift. Go ahead and click that, Anne. We want you to move from viewing or observing or thinking about behavior as behavior problems to really thinking about and viewing a behavior when it happens as a learning characteristic that we have not yet successfully designed for. In other words, that students engaging in that behavior because of something within the environment or within the instruction that isn't a match yet for their learning characteristics. And that's what universal design is really all about, right? It's being able to design for those kids that are kind of in the margins and help them to be able to access, because when we do that, all students succeed. And so if you're dealing with, or you have students who have challenging behavior, think about it as that cue that perhaps there needs to be some additional design that's thought about that helps with their particular learning characteristics so that they can better access without the need for engaging in behavior problems. So why make this shift? Well, when we view things as behavior problems, it gives the impression that the student is somehow choosing to do things inappropriately. And when we enter into a situation with that mindset, it really prompts us to go towards punishment. They engage in a problematic behavior, they need to be punished. There needs to be a consequence. So when we're thinking about behavior problems and viewing it in that way, punishment. Blame. Maybe it's blaming the child. Maybe it's blaming the family. Maybe it's, blaming even ourselves for something that isn't working. When we think about behavior problems, it often results in criticizing. It definitely results in excluding. The number one reason why this population of learners is not provided with the access to LRE is because of behavior. And ultimately, when we think about behavior problems, it prompts us to ignore. Ignore sometimes the student, but ultimately ignore the learning needs that they have and ignore our responsibility as educators to figure out and determine what those needs are so that we can design an effective learning context for those students. Now, gen ed teachers, may need some additional support and collaboration with their special educators to be able to know how to make those appropriate considerations and figure out how to universally design. These evidence-based practices will help with that. But first things first is we have to really move away from thinking about behavior as being behavior problems to, next slide, Anne. Thinking about learning characteristics that we have not yet designed for. Because when we think about things in this way, it prompts us to want to try to understand, encourage, give our attention, and really to figure out how to include the student. And ultimately, having this perspective when it comes to behavior challenges, thinking about them as learning characteristics that need to be thought about more intentionally in terms of the design of our environments and instruction, it helps us to be better teachers. And the way to do this ultimately is with that universal design for learning mindset. This is a core component of it. And we really just want to leave you with this most important thing that we hope you walk away from this training with. And that's that shift from behavior problems to thinking about learning characteristics and universal design. Those 28 evidence-based practices fit beautifully within this context. And we've given you some tools and resources to be able to access further information on those through the AFIRM modules, the Captain website, and then ultimately through our Captain cadre, which are our trainers that are out there in every region of California that are anxious and eager to support you in learning about autism, in learning about evidence-based practices, and in providing you with training and coaching in classrooms on how to do this. And Ann and I have a goal and a mission, and that's to really get people thinking more about how Captain and how our cadre that are out there can be used to support LRE in a greater way. I think people think that we do training for special day classrooms. That's not it at all. We do training on evidence-based practices to support these learners in whatever context that the IEP team has determined appropriate for them. And using these practices and using that universal design for learning can really help make that least restrictive environment the general education setting. These practices are not just for students with autism. I think we've illustrated through today's presentation that they can really be effective and appropriate and supportive for all learners. But we're happy to be the ones to help to support growth and development and learning of these strategies and how to integrate them more under that universal design for learning umbrella within the general education classrooms. And I believe with that, we have some time for questions. And we have the Q&A as well as the chat, both available if people have questions to ask. I'll be looking and I'll read off the questions as they come in. Christine put in the chat, universal design for learning lowers stigma. Absolutely 100%. Everyone gets access to these amazing practices and can benefit from them. Any questions?
Like there's some in the Q&A. Did you see those that weren't in the chat?
Okay, so Jamie asked, are the visual labels available to download? Anne, do you want to take that one about visual supports?
Yes, so Patty talked earlier about the AFIRM modules. And so when you go there for your free online training, they do provide resources and how to implement visual supports. But yes, there are lots of places that if you wanted to send an email to captain.ca.gov, we can send you a list of where you can get visual supports that are already pre-made that you can download. And then there are also some software programs that will, be purchased, and then you can have them at your ready. And also, for not all students can use what we call these picture symbols, the ones that, kind of look graphic or cartoony. Some of our students may require the use of photos. And so lots of our teachers just take a photograph and on their phone and print that out and quickly use that. And some of our students do better with the actual object, or maybe even using like if they like Fritos or goldfish, just to cut out that actual bag kind of maybe. And if you're jerry rigging things, so to speak, you can put some packaging tape on that if you don't have a laminator. Certainly having the tools available to use, a software program, the Meyer-Johnson program is one that a lot of people use. And I would suggest that you go to your speech language pathologist. I'm a speech language pathologist, and most of them do have the Meyer-Johnson software program, if not the special education teacher. And you can go ask them as a member of your team, hey, I need some picture symbols for the following, and I bet they have them for you.
Next question is sign language a good choice for communication? And I'm going to give that one to you also, Anne, because you are a speech and language pathologist. Well,
yeah, well, certainly if they're deaf, of course, we're going to be using that probably as their mode of communication. However, as we consider alternative and augmentative communication modes, what you really need to do is make sure that your speech language pathologist, your AAC specialist, does a comprehensive, thorough assessment about what the best mode of communication is. There's not a tremendous amount of research that supports sign language. And I think one thing that is a drawback is the rest of the world really doesn't know sign language, unfortunately. And so when you teach an individual with autism to use sign language, the audience that they have, that means the family has to learn it, and then the world has to use it. Sometimes our individuals with autism have fine motor difficulties, or maybe they might have difficulty crossing midline, like many of the signs require that. And so we want to be really, really careful about using gestures. We're also finding that many individuals with autism, they may not process gestures, nonverbal gestures and cues the same way that we do. So they may not be able to read these sign language because it's more abstract and it's not something that registers with them. So I think mostly what I would recommend is that you see, if you're thinking the individual needs supports in communicating, alternative or augmentative communication to help them be, more capable to express themselves, that you would go to your speech language pathologist, your AAC specialist, and work together collaboratively to figure out what the best mode of communication might be for that particular student.
This question is there guidance for districts on how to develop universal design for learning, trainings and support for teachers in inclusive pre-K and K classrooms. We have wonderful resources within our statewide system of support. The SIP project, who's hosting this very event, does provide training resources and coaching for districts on universal design for learning, as well as the access program out of Placer County. So I would say that if you're a district and you have or are interested in providing more training and support for your teachers around UDL, to connect with SIP and find out from them who is available within your area to provide that. Little bit of a plug though, you know, the research on evidence-based practices really suggests though that training by itself is not enough. Training is going to increase knowledge, but in order to really help your teachers use the universal design for learning practices or any innovation, any evidence-based practice, it does require some coaching and administrative support. So really think of beyond just the training aspect of how you're going to bring these practices into the classroom, and make sure that you're looking at in-class coaching and what resources and administrative support are available to be able to support the teachers in implementing these practices. Next question is, where can people find out more information or access resources to include students with more highly intensive needs? Anne, do you want to take that one?
Well, if you're talking about individuals, we can again, please send us an email. We can give you a list of those. But yeah, individuals who are complex communicators or have more intensive support needs, really it takes a village and it takes a whole collaboration of the team to really support them, making sure that their IEP goals are meaningful, individualized, and that, you know, one tool that we do recommend, especially for our individuals who have more extensive needs, is the activity matrix, which is on our Captain website. And it's a tool where you go across the top with all their IEP goals, because they tend to have many, many, many IEP goals. And it's hard to address all them and remember all of them. And then down the left side of this matrix, you have every single activity of the day. And as that day intersects, we say, okay, during circle, these are the IEP goals we're going to work on. Here's who's going to work with the student, and here's how we're going to help include them in this particular, you know, task environment and meet their IEP goals. And so it really, you know, that's a tool. But I encourage you to have your IEP team really work together collaboratively. What I see a lot is a lot of separate IEP goals. And, you know, I always say, you know, the only thing that was integrated is that staple at the top left-hand corner that put them all together. But this really requires that IEP team to sit down together to really look at what it takes to help this individual participate in the least restrictive environment, but successfully and meaningfully with quality programming. And we just think using the activity matrix tool really helps to integrate that team, make the IEP goals purposeful and meaningful, and it gets everybody so that when you're in circle, you have the speech and language person go, this is what we're working on. This is what they need to communicate and understand. And the OT is saying, yeah, but I need for them to move. So maybe their OT goals are to get up and go put something on the, you know, the calendar and then come back. So they're working on their motor goals for that. And their fine motor goals is not some isolated task on Tuesdays from 10 to 11, but it's really, you know, they're going to use a pincer grasp to pull the Velcro off to go put it and affix it. So everything's integrated. And I think using the whole team to develop a matrix, if you just get everybody in the room together, you have great minds out there that can work collaboratively and create really rich programs. But you need the leadership to support the time to do that type of work. I hope that answered your question.
So we have a question. What are some strategies to assist students with sensory difficulties? You know, the students who don't seem to hook in or engage in the classroom led activities. And I think that, you know, really thinking about all three of the components of UDL are really important. They may not be engaging because the way that we're trying to communicate to them and give information to them, if it's too many words and not enough visuals or concrete kinds of things, those words may be really hard for them to grab onto. I think, thinking about the sensory difficulties, this is a great opportunity for you to collaborate with your occupational therapist and get some ideas and strategies from them. There's not a magic, sort of toolkit or trick. Every student is unique and different. And so really understanding and looking at what is going on with that individual student in terms of their sensory system and the environment is essential. So it could be that auditory is really distracting to them. I worked with a student a few years ago who wouldn't engage on Mondays. Every other day he was spot on, but on Mondays he would sit and literally try to write while doing this sort of a thing. And we couldn't figure out, well, what is it about Mondays? He's so off. Turns out that was the day that the lawn maintenance was on campus. And even though it was clearly like on the other side of the campus, his sensory sensitivity to that frequency of the lawnmower and the leaf blower made it really, really difficult for him to focus and engage. And so we had to be, like little detectives trying to figure out what's going on for this individual student. That's, part of the sensory makeup, his sensory system. And it became a really easy thing. On Mondays, he went and got some noise cancellation headphones. And while the lawn folks were on campus, he used those and it became a non-issue. It could be that there's an increased need for movement or getting a lot of input into the muscles and joints. And so if that's what's determined to be necessary for a student to be able to focus and pay more attention, there are lots of different things that could be utilized. A weighted lap blanket, allowing them to stand and put pressure on their arms. So those are things though that like I said, we don't have like a magic kit to be able to say, well, if they have autism and they have sensory issues, do this. But there definitely are things that can be done based on the individual that could help to support them within that realm so that they can be more available for learning, so that they are more tuned into instruction. And then one other thing on this, I think too, we have a very culturally biased view of what it means to be engaged and paying attention, i.e., the student isn't watching the teacher or isn't looking at the teacher when they're giving instruction or when they're reading the story. Well, I've actually had students with autism say to me, if I'm watching and paying attention visually, I have a really hard time listening. So if I avert eye contact and am not having to pay attention to all that visual stimulation, then I can process the auditory information better. So I think we need to really kind of think about and define what do we mean by attention and engagement, and think about the individual learner and what that may look like. And that's the beauty of UDL, is it allows us those parameters to be able to do that. All right, let's see here. Specific executive functioning strategies to begin with, according to their developmental progress, all the way up to high school to help transition to the workforce. Yeah, so I'm going to touch on this one too, and then Anne, feel free to weigh in. My experience is that a lot of people start to think about executive functioning strategies and interventions come middle school and high school. When really capable students start to struggle because of organizational skills or not being able to complete assignments without a lot of instruction and structure and support. But interventions that support executive functioning should start and actually do start much earlier. Something as simple as a checklist or a visual schedule is teaching a student how to self-monitor and self-manage their own behavior. And could be integrated even earlier. And I say this, for all students, even those who can keep track of all the things up here and have their little mental checklist, having some of those external strategies can really help benefit them when things start to get way more complicated, as life does. So I'm a huge advocate in starting to address a lot of those executive functioning interventions and strategies very early on, and in a universal sort of context, not just for kids who are struggling once they're struggling, but really as more of a proactive part of instruction and curriculum. Anne, do you have anything to add on that one?
No, you covered it.
Okay.
Answered a question in the chat. It was a question about their particular child, and I said, please send me an email. We can call and talk and guide you more extensively, and kind of what we suggest next steps are to partner with your son's IEP team. There was a question in there about working with older students, maybe middle school and high school. So if you go onto the Captain website, you'll see that there's a whole, do you remember the name of it, Patty? It's about our CSESA.
The Center for Secondary Education for Students with Autism.
Yeah, and you can click on that, and there is a whole world of website with all kinds of amazing support strategies, resources that are all more age appropriate for the older individual with autism. And if you go to the Captain website right here under quick links, it's one of these websites, and just click on it, CSESA, and everything you want to know about high school and middle school. We also have a presentation on the Captain website of the two researchers and developers of this work. And so you can go to the presentation section of the Captain website and listen to an 1.5-hour talk about them describing how you can individualize and specialize efforts for individuals with autism who are older.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. The first one is, at the beginning of the presentation, there was a graphic that listed the evidence-based practices, age, and domains. Person wants to know how they can access that. That is in the NCAEP manual. So if you go to the quick links on the Captain website and go to the very first one, National Clearinghouse for Autism Evidence and Practice, it'll take you to their website. They also have a search engine that you could use on that website, where if you have like a particular age and area domain, like communication, and you want to know what are the evidence-based practices for this age group in this domain, it'll populate with all of the evidence-based practices and resources. And then finally, last question is from a parent, and they want to know, what are some ways of encouraging gen ed teachers who maybe are having a hard time or finding it overwhelming to integrate the high interests and passions into the curriculum. Their philosophy or belief is he needs to learn to do things that aren't necessarily preferred. So Anne, do you want to tackle that last question with our remaining 2 minutes?
Well, was it Oprah that said, when you know better, you do better? And so I think oftentimes it's about education, about what is autism, about universal design for learning, to really bring that person around. I know some of in our inclusive education program at that public school, some of them had to see it work for themselves, like the Missouri State, right? Show me. And so really implementing some of these strategies with our students with autism and seeing how well it worked and the content was learned and their performance on, measuring whether or not they learned it or comprehended it. So sometimes that takes, building that kind of relationship and the kind of having that cultural shift and belief. And sometimes that's hard, for everyone. And so, we have to be gentle and kind and understanding and work on it collaboratively. But I think often inviting them to the presentations that our Captain Cadre give in your region on what is autism, really, what are the EBPs for autism, kind of building that core belief system, kind of gently and softly. And I know that SIP has a lot of good efforts in really changing that belief system, but I really do think it's a lot of it's the show me, and having a personal relationship. And I think once they see that the content is there, like Patty showed on the homophones and the other short answer questions, they still get it. That's the whole point of it. And it's really also really having more informed understanding about the California state standards. The point is not, it's different ways to get to it, get to the performance of did they learn it or not, and getting clear about that. It's not really the how, it's did they get it, did they understand it, did they learn it. And sometimes
I think our time is up, Ann.
Oh, okay. So that's what I recommend. Oh yeah, it's 11 o'clock exactly.
Thank you so much, Anne and Patty, and to our wonderful interpreters and our VFAIR support. Thank you to all of the attendees for your allyship and our support of students with disabilities and their family. And please stay tuned and log in for the next day and a half. And reach out if you have any questions. I dropped my email in the chat, or you can reach out to support@sipinclusion.org, and we will get to you definitely after the conference is over, because things are coming in quick and we're super busy over the next 2 days, but we will not forget you. We'll be checking our emails. Thank you so much.
Thank you.